so that's the most contact that we have now with former residents that we may have known of, or just former residents seeking a service.
So we distributed a list of questions, but I think we can, I'm just going to kind of dive in.
What about the rest of you?
Oh, we can introduce ourselves.
I'm Kelly from Merkaiser. I am a student in historic preservation at SAIC. I work in the art history office there. My interest is mainly from what do you do at historic preservation? Maybe my favorite thing in the world, and I'm getting that degree, but I also feel like, hey, what do you do when the building's not there? Or when it wasn't maybe fun enough or aesthetically pleasing enough history to have saved it. So I kind of got involved because of Bert and Rebecca Zorak, who also works on this project with us, in trying to figure out, how do you manage histories that aren't pretty and stuff. That's what I'm interested in.
You want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Bridget. I'm a student at DePaul. I'm studying geography, and I'm a contributor / advisor on the area. I interned for that over the summer. And so, I just work on it, and my concentration at school is urban planning, and so any sort of information I can soak in about urban issues, I'm always excited to hear about. So.
I'm Bert Stabler, and I'm an art teacher at Bowen High School on the southeast side of Chicago. And I'm fortunate enough to be either 1 or 0 degrees of separation from many people here as far as my own kind of learning encounters with public housing in Chicago. I specifically put together a project on public housing with my students in 2005 and invited a lot of stellar people like Thomas and Janet and to come. I got to meet Roberta briefly for an MCA program, so I got drawn into this project through writing for area Chicago and having just an interest in writing and public housing. The students I work with are low income young people of color. They haven't told me about having a lot of exposure connection to public housing, except sort of remotely in their families. But it's it just seems like a pretty important legacy that ties directly into the history of segregation, ongoing history of segregation in Chicago. And so I think it affects everyone who lives here. And so I'd love to find out more about what the problems are that can be solved, how the solutions that you all have already come up with can be promoted, and what people who are current former residents, what resources they may not know they have access to that we could use Area Chicago, use our article that we're writing to try and describe in a direct way.
I'm Ingrid Hafstad. I'm by day a curator of the Chicago Architecture Foundation. I came to Chicago to go back to school after working as an assistant at a planning agency that dealt with homelessness and HIV/AIDS supportive housing, which was work I really liked, but I missed the humanities stuff that I used to do. So I went back to school and tried to figure out a way to help with it. I'm really interested in how history and art and public policy can intersect to create tools for whether it be an oral history archive or an exhibition on how our city works and how power is distributed in the city, those are the kinds of things. I actually was a student of Rebecca Zorak and checked back in with her and talked to her about ways I could kind of expand the work I was doing. So we came involved there.
I was just thinking, listening, and it seems that since Area has called this convening, maybe one way to talk, because there's not as much time as I'm sure we could all spend talking, is to think about, well, you guys all know what Area is. Small, nonprofit, scrappy, activist, arts, and very flexible. And also, I think at a point in its history where it can kind of do a lot of things. They just started their website. A lot of really smart, energetic people, almost all volunteers. So, and I'm just kind of jumping in, and I'm not sure this is where you want to go, but I would love to know from you guys, as someone who had done this sort of more official work and now is more interested in what area can do, what kind of area, what do you think a group like area with not a lot of money, actually not, but a lot of talent and a lot of, and a sort of a 10-year history and a sense of, maybe at least several more years in which to work on a project. What's a realistic scope for putting together something meaningful about where the resident experience is at? And I don't even want to use the word oral history because it's loaded and people have strong feelings about what that actually means. So maybe even just putting that aside, what do you guys think? What if you could take area and make it your tool, what would you do with it?
That's great.
Yeah.
I have a very strong feeling about what underlies the work I do, so maybe that can be helpful. All of the work that I've been involved in before coming to Chicago and in Chicago is really the underlying value is that housing is human right. If you take that position, what then should the government's role be in that, since the private market simply doesn't fit, can't satisfy that. For me, each of these things that I've been involved with has that sort of underneath. And I think the residents that I've worked with in public housing totally agree with that. I mean, and we're not doing that in this country. I mean, we're simply in this city, we've just erased everything that stood for the government's, the promise of the government and then the failure of the government. And we just sort of erased it. It's been erased and we don't see it anymore. The few buildings that are up, we put pastiche on them, It's kind of scary. And then the little bit of stuff we rebuild has no long-term commitment to the public housing residents that are going to be there even. It's a 30-year commitment, only 30 years in the redeveloped plan for transformations. And we've lost still 80-some-odd% of units, but even those people who are lucky, it's only 30 years. So it's this whole issue of the government's role in housing. Housing is a human right that is just, we're losing it. And the residents' voices can speak to that. And I think there's multiple other strategies as well, but I think we've got to get this out there again. It's really scary to me. The residents of public housing were blamed for the failure. Architects were blamed for the failure. Planners were too, absolutely. But if you look at all the research that was done on it, which I did, I dug up the government-sponsored research. It was the government. It was poor management of a program that was short-sighted, that didn't have enough money, blah, 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 etc.
Well, the government was blamed too.
But not if you read the media, which I had my students do. I literally had my students go, and yes, the defender may have blamed the government. You read the Tribune. I had them look at all of the newspaper articles from the 30s up till today, because that's where most people get their knowledge from. And you didn't see the government being blamed in the Tribune at all. In fact, the residents were blamed pretty consistently. So if you take what the public knows, right, we've got a real problem, because then the public isn't going to support this. And if we don't have the public will, we're not going to get our politicians to support it.
Can I follow up on that?
Please,
I
please.
think that's really, really well said. I do think that there's a role for you guys to play in terms of documenting, as Professor Feldman said, information that leads people to the conclusion that housing is a right. And I will let me explain that thoroughly, okay? Let me give you guys a word of caution first of all, because you guys can do a lot of damage as well, right? Public housing is not gone. There are today 130,000 people who live in public housing in Chicago. That is a large population of public housing residents in Chicago, historically speaking, right? And the number is growing every year. What's changed is that there's not really high-rise units anymore. There aren't really high-rise units except in the senior buildings in a couple of other locations. But mainly the high rises are gone. The image, which most of you guys are a little young, I think, to remember, but the image of public housing residents as welfare queens in high-rise palaces, which is a quote or almost a quote from President Ronald Reagan, is gone in the physical memory of people, in the sense that there's no longer a building that they can deposit that memory in, and it's fading from the public consciousness, but it's not gone. And to the extent that you guys resurrect it, that's bad. To the extent that you guys understand that regardless of whether we declare housing to be a right, most people in this society are going to claim housing as their right. They are going to house themselves, whether they're going to house themselves in someone else's apartment, or in a vacant unit, or in some other scenario, they are going to house themselves rather than, be homeless, right? That's what a lot of people are doing today. So what we're doing is we're creating a situation where we've created a kind of artificial debate in the society about whether housing is right. People have decided for themselves, right? And to the extent that you guys kind of recognize that reality and do something to reify their sense of housing as their right, that's a good thing. But to the extent that you guys separate public housing off, put it under a microscope, make it seem something different, let's say, than federal dollars that go into building a highway to a former piece of farmland.
Or subsidizing homeowners through tax credit.
Yeah.
Yes, mortgage, it's the same thing.
Exactly. To the extent that you guys talk about it as something any different than that, a funding stream that is going in a certain direction, you're making it worse. So just please keep that in mind and don't make our work harder.
I'd also like to expand on what both Roberta and Eitan said. I think maybe the place to start in thinking about Area's mission is the set of problems we face at this juncture. So there, it was implied in both sets of remarks. I think there's a way of thinking about poverty and social exclusion as a narrative phenomenon. There is a story that's told. There are multiple stories that are told. In the case of the official narrative, vast resources go into sustaining those stories. Apropos Roberta's remark about the Tribune over time, journalism generally, with occasional exceptions, has aided and abetted and has endlessly recycled the conventional wisdom and a set of almost prefab tropes and images to represent a complex reality. So I would first suggest really taking a critical perspective on the narrative phenomena of poverty and exclusion. And it goes to Eitan's caution, but it has sort of multiple different dimensions. But this is really complicated, contested ground. And it's very hard even to create a space to tell a story, because the structures of perception that pre-exist your telling the story are so very strong. And so part of, and another way of putting that is, remind me as an example. I can, at an ethnographic and literary level, construct a pretty accurate account of the drug trade at Roddy Taylor or Stateway and how it worked and how people fell into the life and what the texture and feel of. Very not reporting on that. I still haven't figured out how to do reporting like that and not have it be, and let's assume it's good. Not self-flattering, but let's just assume I do a good job for the purpose of making this point. What I haven't figured out is how to do that, deploy it in mass media, and not have it be immediately assimilated to the things people think they already know. And the way in which poverty and exclusion are narrative phenomena is people know your story before they know anything about you, because they know an incidental fact about you. They know the color of your skin, your sexual preference, in case of public housing, your address. And that dynamic is so incredibly powerful that I would urge you not to underestimate it. And good work and well-intended work can inadvertently become part of that dynamic. And so you have to think strategically, and you need to subvert a lot of things just to create some space to for resident voices to be heard, for your own voice and your own critical perspective to be heard. I completely, embrace what Roberta said about housing as a human right. I think it's also important to remember, though, that when people talk about public housing in our kind of symbolic discourse, they are talking about a constellation of things that include housing, but include a lot of other stuff.
Oh, yes.
And so part of the evolution of my work, for years I worked on physical conditions in public housing and creating employment opportunities, challenging the disconnect between the sort of, particularly the philanthropic and research and policy wonk discourse and observable realities on the ground. Such a disconnect.